It is Monday, September 5th, 2022, which means week one of the 2022 NFL season is officially underway. We have real NFL games this week with real stakes, real stuff on the line. And of course, along with that comes the official start of our 2022 fantasy football matchups. In this video, I'll be helping you guys out with your lineups and helping you set that stuff, making those also important decisions this week with 5 must-start running backs here for week one action. If you're new around here, make sure to drop down, click that like button, and subscribe to the channel. Turn the bell on so you're never late for an episode. I'll be posting fantasy football content just like this video and a ton of other stuff across multiple platforms, but especially here on YouTube every single day throughout the entire year, and you don't want to miss any of that great stuff. Additionally, I am here to help you and be a resource and a tool for your fantasy success this year. All of your questions, all of your pressing fantasy needs, put that stuff down in the comment section below, and I'll get back to as many of you as possible as quickly as I possibly can here. It's going to be a great season. I'm super pumped and super excited to get started. I've done a lot of talking for today's intro. Without further ado, let's get started with today's video. Alrighty, here we go, getting kicked off with our first must-start running back of the season here for 2022. The first name I'd like to cover with you guys today is Elijah Mitchell of the San Francisco 49ers. His matchup this week is traveling on the road to play the Chicago Bears, the 27th ranked unit against fantasy football running backs just a season ago. In 2021, obviously that puts them as a bottom 5 team in the NFL against fantasy running backs. So already off the bat here, we're looking at a very favorable situation. In addition to that, the situation plays out beautifully here. One of my biggest concerns for Elijah Mitchell over the course of this season is going to be durability. He played just 11 games in his rookie season, missed 6 contests a year ago, so we could potentially see some shuffling up of the depth chart come the rest of this season. But for week one here, I'm very confident in what Mitchell can bring to the table for our lineups. Based off of BetUS's sportsbook, the link is in the description of today's video to go check them out and get yourself signed up to play and obviously bet and gamble on different games this year. Elijah Mitchell and the San Francisco 49ers are 7.5-point favorites in that matchup, again on the road against Chicago, in Trey Lance's first official start as the long-term starter here for the San Francisco organization. He did have some starts last season filling in for Jimmy Garoppolo due to injury, but this time around it is his team, it is his go at it, and I fully expect Kyle Shanahan and this offensive staff to really protect Trey Lance in week one this season. They're going to lean on that run game, that very physical offensive line, and they're going to set the tone by running the football. Again, this was a very poor Chicago defense against fantasy running backs a season ago, and I would argue their roster took even further blows, losing guys like Khalil Mack via trade to the LA Chargers. And it's just a really depleted roster overall. So I think the 49ers, obviously, again, that 7.5-point favorite number on the road indicates that this is a lopsided matchup that's tied, or excuse me, that is the second highest favorite this week behind the Colts against the Texans here in week one. There's a lot of stuff to like here. Elijah Mitchell has proved last season he can be a very effective player in our lineups when healthy and given the opportunity to play. So with that matchup, with this mismatch of just stacking 2 rosters up against one another, I would expect a blowout win here for the 49ers, a very favorable run-heavy game script, not only because of the fact that I expect them to lead by so much late in this contest, but also because of the fact that I think that Trey Lance, again, will be protected by this coaching staff throughout this game. So, additionally, the 49ers were 9th in team run plays per game last season, being top 10. That metric shows you that they're run heavy to begin with, aside from just that Trey Lance added analysis there. And the fact that Elijah Mitchell had an 80.8% opportunity share in this 49ers backfield last year, which ranked 3rd amongst all running backs, is very intriguing. Now that number could potentially go down this season. You've got guys like Tyrion Davis-Price in the backfield, amongst others. So we'll see how that shakes out down the course and the stretch of this season, but for week one in a vacuum here, I really like Mitchell at Chicago here in week one. Before I move on to my second must-start running back for week one action here, I want to let you guys know how I can become your personal fantasy football advisor here for this season. I will talk to you about your lineups every week, give you advice on all of your questions, help you set your lineups every single week this season. All you got to do is either scan the QR code in the top right-hand corner of your screen and sign sign up for one of our plans on sizzlefantasy.com or check out Underdog Fantasy. It's an awesome platform, great best ball. You can play week-to-week matchups on there. If you hurry up before the season kicks off here on the 8th, you can head over to Underdog and draft a best ball team for this entire season. When you head over to Underdog, make sure to sign up using code SFS on Underdog Fantasy, and that'll get you a deposit match bonus of 100%. So up to $100, they will double your money. Put $10 in, you'll get 20 to play with. Put $100 in, you'll get 200 to play with. And again, you will get in-season lineup advice through myself in sizzlefantasy.com all season long through this year's Super Bowl. Absolutely free as a toss on top of that stuff. So the link to Underdog is in the description of today's video. So is sizzlefantasy.com, or again, scan that QR code. There's also a pop-up that'll probably show up on that page if you would like instructions and an in-depth video about how to sign up for the Underdog platform. They get in contact with me every single day and let me know about signups. So that stuff will all be taken care of within a 24-hour period of time. So go check that stuff out. Antonio Gibson is our second player here on the board, playing the Jacksonville Jaguars at home this week. The Jags were 18th against fantasy running backs a season ago, so a little bit lower than the middle of the pack. You're on the second half of the totem pole here in terms of you've got 32 NFL teams. They came in at 18th, so again, just a barely bottom half team in terms of how they've played against fantasy running backs in seasons past. But what I like about this matchup is I think it is a very, very even playing field for both teams. These are both very flawed rosters, but obviously Antonio Gibson being a player who, if you've been watching content and draft advice and videos here on the channel throughout the summer, no, I have been very, very low on Antonio Gibson throughout the process. He has continually fallen down my board and been someone I really haven't been interested in drafting at any stage of the season. When we started making draft content, we were kind of already to the point where they had drafted Brian Robinson, and I saw that as a very, very glaring issue for him on this football team this season. However, if you've been following the NFL news here, or if you've got Adam Schefter on Twitter, you have obviously heard the unfortunate circumstances and news of the Brian Robinson injury and the carjacking that occurred a couple weeks back now. It may have only been like a week and a half, but you get the point here. Very, very unfortunate stuff. He is going to be out for this week 1 game. He's actually technically out indefinitely. We don't have a time frame on when he's going to return to the field. But the moral of the story and the point being here that Antonio Gibson will resume kind of the same situation we saw him step into during the 2021 season, where yes, Gibson was relatively disappointing. He didn't do quite as much in the receiving game as I hoped for. But in a vacuum of this week 1 bubble here, we know that that means Antonio Gibson's going to recoup some of that goal line usage and short yardage situational use that he would have otherwise likely have lost to Brian Robinson, who actually looked like he took over the starting job, looked like he had earned the starting running back position for this Commanders offense. And now again, we're kind of backtracking heading into week 1 here to those 2021 numbers and that outlook with just J.D. McKissic and Antonio Gibson in this situation. So I have Antonio as a middle of the pack running back 2 in 12-team formats for this week. Again, I'm not expecting him to catch a high volume of passes. He might catch a few balls here and there. In terms of his targets and receptions last season, he was 16th or lower amongst running backs in those categories. So nothing too impressive, but the things that were impressive for Gibson last year, he was 4th in both carries and red zone touches. So that is a very valuable portion of this Commanders offense that he will be recouping here again from the absence of Brian Robinson in this game. Washington is also 3-point favorites, so anything can happen. Trevor Lawrence could have some massive breakout game here and just mop the floor with the Commanders. That could potentially result in a bust for this pick here, but that's not what I'm expecting, not here in week 1. The Commanders do have a somewhat stingy defense. We'll actually talk about that in just a second here. However, I think that this plays out very well for Gibson being a respectable lineup piece here as a guy who you may not have drafted to be a starter here in week 1, but ultimately can fulfill that role for your team. I also expect the Commanders to, just like I expected with Elijah Mitchell, the 49ers to lean heavy on that run game. You're in a transition period here with Carson Wentz. It's your first game with this new quarterback. To all accounts, it has been a miserable offseason for the Commanders. It's been riddled with struggles in camp with Carson Wentz, inconsistent play, all that great stuff. I wasn't at Commanders camp, so, all I can do is read the reports. I actually am relatively positive Carson Wentz here. But again, if that's the game plan, you do have a defensive coach in Ron Rivera. Leaning on that run game does not seem like something that's too far out of the realm of possibility, or, might just be the likely situation and circumstance to unfold here. So, liking Antonio Gibson as well this week. Travis Etienne on the other side of that matchup, another player I'm in love with for fantasy this season. I shouldn't say another player I'm in love with, because I'm not in love with Antonio Gibson for 2022 fantasy football. But for week 1, I am all in on Travis Etienne for the entire scope of this season as well. He is, of course, like I said, on the other side of this matchup. So a 3-point underdog with the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the Washington Commanders. Totally fine by me, because to me, this has a lot less to do with the matchup, because the Washington Commanders were actually a really stout and stingy matchup for fantasy running backs last season, literally ranking first amongst the fantasy running back position a season ago. For what it's worth, Chase Young's not going to be in this game, so that's fine. At the end of the day, I don't think he has too much of a bearing on how Etienne is going to be factored into this game. But the things you love to see, and the reasoning that I'm so high on him for this matchup, again, goes back to the skill set rather than the matchup here for the Jaguars and Commanders. You've got an immensely talented pass-catching running back with Travis Etienne here, who also figures to be the Week 1 starter and lead back in the run game, with James Robinson having his first contest back here from the Achilles tear he had late last season. Of course, those injuries tend to linger even when you're back on the field. You don't necessarily regain all of your explosiveness at the same time. You're not necessarily 100% in that first matchup back. So regardless, even when you just look at the draft capital investment from a first-round pick in Etienne into an undrafted free agent who was a really, really good player in James Robinson, the team values Etienne more to begin with, so he's going to be fed the rock a lot this year. The reason I love Etienne, especially in this matchup as well, is if you go back to his first preseason game that he had here in 2022, he played in the first half. In that first half, he had 11 routes run, and if you pace that out over the entirety of that entire game, that was a bit redundant there, but if you pace that out over the course of that game, you're getting a 22 route run performance for a running back, which is very unprecedented territory. For players that had 20 or more routes run as their average for the 2021 season, only 4 players did that. All 4 of those guys being very involved in the fantasy landscape, being very relevant lineup pieces, from Austin Eckler, the RB3 or 4 last year, DeAndre Swift, who on a per game basis was an RB1 last season, Leonard Fournette, another fantastic pass catching back, and Najee Harris, who I believe was actually the RB3 last year. Those are all names and company that you want to be associated with, and that routes run number for Travis Etienne places him in that category. Yes, it was a preseason game, but they shut him down and didn't really have him touching the rock later in those preseason contests, which shows you the value and importance they place upon his presence and availability for that lineup come week 1 action here. So again, I'm all in on the skill set. I think he's going to see a lot of footballs come his direction. You have that pre-existing chemistry where I'm not going to totally run this into the ground like I would if it were a Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Obviously, the relationship with the quarterback is so important for the receiver position. You can downplay it a little bit because Travis Etienne is a running back, but I do still think it's worth noting Lawrence and Etienne did play together in college. They were very effective as a pass-catching duo. Obviously Lawrence throwing him the football out of the backfield. And I expect that the Jaguars and Doug Peterson, a coach who as an offensive coordinator and head coach in his career has provided 4 or more passing game opportunities per game to his lead running back, to line him out wide, put him in the slot, use him creatively, put him in mismatches, all over the field, and really take advantage of the athlete that he has in Travis Etienne in space. So it's a solid start for me this week. Travis Etienne will be going in my lineups, and regardless of the fact, the draft capital investment, the ADP price you paid for him, probably leaves him as a starter for your lineup regardless this week. So A.J. Dillon is the 4th player I want to get into for today's episode. The Green Bay Packers are traveling on the road to take on the Minnesota Vikings, and I love A.J. as a starting level player this week. I probably should have prefaced this earlier in today's video, so basically my criteria for including someone in a video like this one, that'll be a wide receivers portion of this episode also coming out today, Basically, I do my weekly lineup rankings, which is included on sizzlefantasy.com for 2022 All Access Pass members and SFS Gold members, as well as those who sign up for Underdog using code SFS. That just places you on the All Access Pass plan, which gets you membership access on our site through the Super Bowl. The criteria is once I've compiled my weekly lineup rankings for all position groups, I do them all separately, so you can just take a look at that for each individual player and position on your team. Then I start to go in there and find those bubble RB2s for 12-team formats. So guys like ranked in the 20 to 26 range. Again, just on the cusp of being an RB2 to being an RB3 level player. I figure out which of those guys I like more and why. Obviously make some adjustments. And then I toss on the guys who ultimately I think aren't, your every single week, set it and forget it type players, guys that, maybe next week you don't want to start A.J. Dillon, but this week I think they do meet the cut and do meet the criteria for why they should be on your roster. So hopefully that provides a little bit more clarity on the, explanations for why these players make the list for today's video. But this week, again, on the road, playing the Vikings, the 12th ranked unit against fantasy running backs last year. So a top half defense against fantasy RBs. Still a matchup I like here. This is a Packers offense going through a period of transition at the wide receiver position, which I think actually has a lot of impact on the running back room here. Not only for just the early parts of this season, but especially throughout the course of this entire year. But I do think that impact will be felt even more extremely here in the earlier weeks of this season. You've got 4 wide receivers essentially, from Allen Lazard to Sammy Watkins to Christian Watson to Romeo Doubs, all vying and competing for that wide receiver 1 status, all competing for the larger majority of the target share in this Packers offense. And really, if we're being honest about ourselves here, as much as, we've talked about teams relying and leaning on their run games throughout today's video, I think that Aaron Rodgers may just rely on this running back room in the pass game as well. Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon are 2 players who I fully expect to coexist and be able to produce in spite of each other, both having very prominent roles in this offense. And the reasoning for that is they're both going to be on the field at the same time. They're going to have 2 back sets. They're going to put A.J. Dillon in the backfield, line Aaron Jones up in the slot. They're going to move these 2 players all over the place and squeeze every last ounce of value out of each other that they can. Matt LaFleur is going to get these trusted playmakers in his offense. He actually described these 2 as both, kind of cream of the crop running back ones in the NFL here. He's going to get those guys touches and get them the football. Additionally, Aaron Rodgers has talked through both of these names potentially seeing 50-plus catch seasons. They're going to be used out of the backfield and in the pass game. And for the running back position, those are immensely valuable touches and very great roles to find yourself associated with here. There's the potential that both Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon in PPR formats could finish this season as top 20 running backs. That is very, very realistic, considering, again, the way I expect them to be used as pass catchers, and again, producing in spite of each other and not necessarily providing hindrance to each other's ability to be relevant lineup pieces. Yes, if one was here and the other wasn't, maybe you can make a top 5 case in this high level producing offense. In terms of their overall fantasy finish, these 2 players could be amongst, the RB1s in fantasy football had the other not been present in the offense. That's not the case here, though. In terms of A.J. Dillon just being a handcuff this year, he's one of the best options there is for fantasy football here in 2022. And again, I love him in this matchup while that offense is transitioning and trying to find some other consistently reliable pieces in that passing game that can produce on a week-to-week basis. So just trying to check over my notes here one last time, make sure I didn't miss anything I wanted to talk about here, and it looks like we're good. So let's move on to our final player for today's episode, someone who, again, may not have been drafted at a price that, requires him to be in your lineup every single week this season, but a matchup I do really like, despite it not looking super beautiful and eye-pleasing on paper, is Josh Jacobs taking on the Los Angeles Chargers, the 16th ranked unit against fantasy running backs in 2021. Again, that is dead even in the middle of the pack, and this is a game where I very much so think Josh Jacobs may have one of his best games of the season. That's not necessarily something you always love to hear. Week 1 peakers are the worst. Sammy Watkins, I joke about this all the time, is the king of dominating week 1 and then never being heard from again in fantasy lineups. We'll see if that's the case this year, though. He's got lower barriers to entry than usual in that Packers offense with other unproven assets as well to compete against. But we're talking running backs right now. Josh Jacobs is our 5th and final player on the must-start players list. Again, if you guys want access to my weekly positional rankings, check those out on sizzlefantasy.com or by using code SFS on Underdog Fantasy. There's 3 different ways to get yourself hooked up with access to that stuff. And again, that gets access to my DMs on Discord, and I'll answer your questions and provide weekly lineup advice to you guys as well. So basically the situation at hand here with Josh Jacobs is he has had a noisy offseason. We have talked a lot about the depth chart and potential usage of these Raiders running backs. A lot of this stemming from the Zamir White draft selection, the declining of Jacobs' 5th-year option from the team. And then obviously, as of late, we've got the Kenyon Drake cut, which has really opened up some more opportunity in this offense. And I would say reestablishes the confidence of this front office in both Jacobs for this season and Zamir White long-term based on what the two have shown in camp. If you remember back to the Hall of Fame game, Josh Jacobs was going crazy against that Jags defense. Not something we're going to read too much into, but he did look very, very good in that game. Basically, the point I want to make here is that the last time we saw Josh Jacobs on the field was in a 35-32 winner-take-all overtime W against the LA Chargers on the road for the final playoff spot in the AFC. Now, in that contest, Josh Jacobs had 26 carries for $132 and a touchdown with 5.1 yards per carry. Very efficient numbers there, especially for a guy in Josh Jacobs who I have dinged the last couple of seasons for his lack of efficiency and inefficiency, rather, when touching the football. However, something about these matchups with the Chargers, the pace of play, the strategy offensively for the Raiders has really favored his fantasy value here. When the Raiders are playing the Chargers, they do not want to get in a shootout. They want to keep the football in their possession, have long, extended, and sustained drives, and keep the ball out of Justin Herbert's hands. The best way to do that, despite the fact that you have a garbage offensive line, is to turn around and hand the football to a workhorse, sturdy running back like Josh Jacobs and let him carry the load, milk that clock, and limit the amount of points you have to score. Now, they went after it. They went 35-32, won that game in Week 18 last year, locked in that playoff spot, and actually gave Cincinnati a run for their money in that wild card playoff loss. However, this season, to open things up here, I don't expect things to be much different. The Raiders are very capable of scoring points through the air and passing the rock. You've got Renfro, you've got Waller, you've got Devontae Adams, of course, all at your disposal that you can use in the passing game. And it's not like Derek Carr is a slouch and can't throw the football to fend for himself as well. But what Josh Jacobs gives you the ability to do, again, is to limit the time of possession that the Chargers have and really force Justin Herbert to be flawless with his execution, which was something that they weren't always able to do, hence that loss by that overtime field goal marker last year. So to kind of project for this time around, the matchup we've got here in Week 1, the argument can be made, yes, maybe Josh Jacobs won't see nearly that level of involvement in this offense. You have Zamir White there. He's capable of touching the rock. However, if you're going to ask me, I'm personally not super bullish on the rookie running backs in Week 1 here. This is a situation where I expect all of their roles to grow over time here, but there's really no rookie running back that I'm super confident about here in Week 1, and that also includes Zamir White's RB2 change of pace role, or whatever you want to call that, with the Raiders offense here. I am personally starting Josh Jacobs this week over guys like Breece Hall, Dameon Pierce, two of the top running backs for fantasy this season, who I love long-term more than I like Josh Jacobs this season. However, in a vacuum again this week, I'm taking Josh Jacobs. I'm trusting the fact that Week 1, the Raiders are going to play a fairly conservative game here. They're working in some new stuff. It's the first game for new head coach Josh McDaniels. They have some moving pieces and some moving parts here, and one of the most comforting things for an offense is to lean on that run game and really let them carry the rock and ultimately put the team on their back for the early stages of the season, where point production tends to be a bit lower and defenses tend to reign a little bit more supreme here. So And, the Chargers defense did struggle at times against running backs last year. And Josh Jacobs, like I said, for the millionth time, was one of those running backs that really hammered them down the stretch of last year. So 2 other names, just to toss them out there, that I would start Josh Jacobs over here in week 1 are Rashad Penny and David Montgomery, 2 players who, again, maybe over the course of the whole year are better than Josh Jacobs, but for week 1 here, I will take Jacobs' services for what they're worth and have him as a quality running back 2 option. So those are my 5 must-start running backs here for week 1 of 2022 Fantasy Football. If you enjoyed, make sure to smash that like button. I appreciate the heck out of all you guys for being around here today. Again, if you have questions for me, please put those in the comment section below. Make sure to check out sizzlefantasy.com. Scan that QR code in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Get yourself access to myself as your personal fantasy advisor for this year, or code SFS on Underdog Fantasy, and we'll get you hooked up with all that great stuff that you need to dominate your leagues all year long. Thank you so much, you guys. Make sure to stay tuned for the must-start receivers video, which is also coming out today, and a bunch more content. I'll be posting weekly articles on sizzlefantasy.com as well, and posting stuff on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. If you want to hang out with me basically during the game, Twitter is a great place to follow me for that. I'll be tweeting out random stuff live throughout the games here. And, as Scott Hansen says, 11 commercial-free hours, or 11 hours of commercial-free football start now. You'll have 11 hours of commercial-free SFS tweets. So go check out all those links in the description of today's video. There's a ton of stuff to check out. Again, I appreciate you guys for being here. Peace out.